Alex, it's great to be here. Everybody hear me? Wonderful to be back at Dartmouth and to reconnect with my roots. It's great to see so many people here. It means one of three things must be true. Attendance must be mandatory, the skiway must be closed, or free beer must be served afterwards. Which is it? So in honor of being here, I wore my Jerry Garcia tie to remind myself of what we used to listen to nearly 40 years ago when I was here. Does anyone know who Jerry Garcia was? Oh, what a long, strange trip it's been. So I'm a recovering engineer, a recovering lawyer, and now I give investment advice to large institutional investors, which is a classic example of doing a job that you're not qualified for. So this is proof that a Dartmouth education can get you a long way. One great thing about not having spent any time in the profession I'm now in, which is my third career, is I don't know what's not possible, which is actually a tremendous advantage when you're trying to get people to do things that they don't want to do and tell you they can't. I'm not convinced that that's true. So I actually had a deep interest in the environment since Earth Day in 1970 when I was in high school and got captivated with solving environmental problems. Came to Dartmouth and majored in engineering science and went on and tried being an environmental engineer for a while and eventually concluded that my verbal skills were less bad than my quantitative skills and I had to try something else. So I went on to law school and spent a while doing that. And then I quit as a partner in a big law firm because I was convinced I wasn't working on things that made any difference and that I wanted to spend the rest of my working life trying to solve problems like climate change. So it's great to be back here. And I think one thing that it turns out, I didn't realize at the time, we got a really excellent education here. I think one thing that distinguishes Thayer School and the Thayer and the Dartmouth approach to educating engineers is the sort of broad, holistic approach to problem solving that we learned. It turned out that going to Thayer School was really good training to go to law school and become a practicing lawyer and sort of learning sort of a structured, disciplined approach to problem solving and a certain degree of creativity. And I think maybe those characteristics are why so many Thayer engineers go on to found and lead companies, and a disproportionate number of CEOs come out of this institution. So I'm here to talk about the mushy subject of sustainability and how a business can thrive and be profitable. And indeed, in order to thrive and be profitable in the long term, you've got to pay attention to environmental, social, and governance factors. So I work for an organization called Ceres in Boston, a sort of interesting nonprofit. We are economic advocates for sustainable capitalism. I'll try to give you some idea what that means. And we try to make the business case for sustainable business and investment practices and also smart government policies that promote things like clean energy. So I'll try to talk a little bit about this. And I'm hoping to allow some time for discussion and questions and not just talk at you for a long time. So we work with a bunch of large companies. We work with institutional investors, which is pension funds and people who manage their money. And also do some policy advocacy in Washington, D.C. for things like incentives for renewable energy. And we put out a whole bunch of reports, and I brought a few copies of one of them today called the 21st Century Corporation. We try to do a certain amount of thought leadership around what we describe as sustainable business and investment practices. Look at the world from a perspective of risk and opportunity. What are the risks out there of things that can go wrong or are already going wrong, and what are the opportunities that solving those risks creates? So what is sustainability? The classic definition is meeting the needs of today without compromising the ability to meet the needs of tomorrow. So not leaving our children and grandchildren a world that's a complete mess. Another view of it is the triple bottom line, succeeding financially, environmentally, and socially. And the definition that I like the best is sort of a business strategy that generates long-term shareholder value by embracing opportunities and managing risks from environmental, social, economic, environmental, and social issues. So that's sort of our distillation of what this means. And again, a friend of mine wrote a book called the Triple Bottom Line, sort of how some of the most successful businesses, companies like IBM or 3M, are good at not only the financial part, but the ES and the G, the environmental, the social, and the governance, sort of how the company runs itself. So what are some of the drivers, the global megatrends that make sustainability important today? Obviously, population growth. We're going to be a planet of 9 billion people sometime soon. Resource depletion. Water scarcity is an increasing problem, particularly in China, but increasingly in the United States. The Mississippi River is down to levels where barges almost can't get down it right now. Economic globalization. Climate change is the biggie. We've seen a lot of extreme weather this year. Hurricane Sandy, Irene a couple of years ago, the drought in the Midwest. And then the world is much more connected in terms of transparency and communication, which you all know better than I do. I mean, sort of a troubling fact is that we are consuming the planet's resources at about 1.5 times, 50% faster, 50% larger rate than the world can sustain it. So we're exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet by 50%. That is obviously unsustainable, and all of you are going to have to help figure out solutions to that, and that's kind of what we're working on. So anyhow, it's going to be a warm, crowded planet sometime soon. So ESG, again, that's environmental, social, and governance risks have bottom line impacts for businesses. Insurance companies have been particularly hammered by the trend of extreme weather. Paid out $41 billion for Katrina, the Massey Energy explosion at the Big Branch mine in West Virginia that killed a bunch of miners also pretty much killed the company. Their CEO had to resign, and they got bought. BP had a near-death experience as a result of its oil spill in the Gulf, which really resulted from poor safety management practices. Superficially, BP was very highly rated as a green company, but they had this disturbing habit of blowing up refineries and oil pipe leaks, and then this, which suggested they weren't doing a very good job and were cutting a lot of corners to try to save money, which was obviously penny wise and pound foolish. We've had a couple of really bad years, which I think is probably the new normal for weather catastrophes in the U.S. I think each of the last 2 years there have been 12 extreme weather events that cost at least $1 billion in losses. So that's a graphic from one of our recent reports about the insurance industry. Sort of more of the same here. Hurricane Sandy, probably about $50 billion in damage, about $25 billion of which was insured, which is bad for the insurance companies, and the other $25 billion is bad for those who didn't have insurance. And unfortunately, it looks like with all the disaster relief and the flood insurance, we're probably going to rebuild an awful lot of what was there before, so it gets destroyed again. I don't want to minimize the human scope of the tragedy in losing your home, but there's got to be a smarter way to do things than rebuilding the same infrastructure. Companies, at least big companies, are starting to get that sustainability issues should be integrated into corporate strategy and management, that these things are getting much more important and that they affect the bottom line. These are surveys by some of the big accounting and business consulting firms. So CEOs and CFOs are starting to believe that this stuff matters. The business case. So I guess there's an increasing amount of data from academic studies that shows this isn't just feel-good stuff, but that sustainable business practices really matter. Virtually 100. Deutsche Bank did a report, a meta study, came out last summer of more than 100 academic studies that showed in virtually all cases, companies that had high ratings for sustainability had superior performance financially and had a lower cost of capital in terms of raising debt and equity. And also, a lot of the studies showed that the so-called socially responsible investing, I guess the kind that would involve positive screening, investing in best-in-class companies and technologies and assets, tended to do better than other investment strategies and certainly no worse. So the myth that socially responsible investing involves sacrificing returns to achieve other objectives is kind of outdated and generally wrong. But there's still a myth that you can't invest that way because it violates your fiduciary duty, which I think we're setting out to disprove. I work with institutional investors, again, pension funds, the big public pension funds. Virtually every state has one for its public employees, its teachers, union pension funds. There are religious pension funds for clergy. There are academic pension funds. TIAA-CREF manages the retirement and health plans for an awful lot of college and university faculty and for me. Increasingly, the institutional investors are starting to demand that the companies and the other assets they invest in pay attention to environmental and social factors and run themselves well. There's an organization called the Principles for Responsible Investment, which is affiliated with the United Nations, the PRI. It now has over 1,000 members who manage over $30 trillion. They've signed up to 7 principles, one of which is integrating environmental, social, and governance factors into your investment decisions. Another of which is to be an active owner, to stay on the case of the companies you own to do these things. Companies don't like shareholder activism, but they need to learn to live with it. And one of the things that my program does is coordinate shareholders who file shareholder resolutions with companies to get them to do things that the companies aren't doing to manage these issues. The investor network that I manage now has 102 members. The biggest pension funds in the country, CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York State, New York City, Florida, and the largest asset managers who manage their money, BlackRock, State Street. I spoke to the annual Prudential investment conference down in New Jersey yesterday, and a whole lot of other investors who care about climate change and some of these other issues that I'm talking about. So the owners, institutional investors own a majority of the shares of the world's companies, are starting to demand that companies pay attention to these things, which will affect your work and your life and your opportunities. So things have become more complicated. You can't just solve the technical problem anymore. If you don't solve the human ones and the environmental ones, your solution won't work or it won't last very long. Part of the thought leadership we've done, in 2010, Ceres issued this report called the 21st Century Corporation, a roadmap for sustainability, and it's on our website, and I brought a few copies of it, but it lists 20 expectations for companies. It answers the question, well, what does it mean to be a sustainable business, which is we often get asked by companies that haven't started this journey yet, and it is a journey, it's not a destination. You keep working, keep improving, keep figuring it out, how it applies to your business. And there are 4 different areas in which these expectations are outlined, which I'll go over for you. And there's like 200 examples of real companies doing real things in the report, so it's not really hypothetical in terms of giving examples of best practices or at least good practices. So this is a little more on that. So we've broken it down into 4 categories. The first is performance. This is sort of the obvious ones. The company's operations. What are you doing? What are you doing with your building? The heating, the lighting, the energy, the water consumption, the waste you generate. The supply chain. This is gaining increasing attention. It's not just what you do within the fence line of your own business or your own operations, your own factory. What about all of your suppliers? Companies are starting to get held accountable for what their suppliers are doing or not doing, especially since a lot of production has been outsourced to lower cost markets like China and India, where the standards may not be as high and there may be more pollution generated and they may not treat their workers very well. The next is governance. How is the company run? Does the board care and pay any attention to these issues, environmental issues, social issues? Is management accountable? Does the CEO care about this, or is this some siloed corporate social responsibility function that's off to the side that doesn't really influence the company's business strategy. Executive compensation. Do the most senior people in the company get paid based, at least in part, on how they perform in these issues? What policies does the company have? And what positions does the company take on government policy? There's a bunch of big companies that say, oh yeah, we're really green and we think climate change is a serious problem, we want to do something about it. And then they're lobbying like crazy in Washington to do things like defund the EPA and prevent any legislation to solve these problems. Well, that's kind of hypocritical and two-faced, and one of the things we do is try to expose that type of inconsistency and demand that companies sort of put their money and their political advocacy where their mouth is, and not just engage in greenwash. Stakeholder engagement. This is a hard part that doesn't come naturally. Hearing from outsiders, bringing in your critics, bringing in your shareholders, bringing in people who have opinions about how you do business, bringing in the community. You can't just run your business. It actually helps to ask for feedback. This is one of the things, this is how Ceres works with companies. The 70 or so big companies we work with, and the demand for this service actually exceeds the supply, that we hold their feet to the fire and try to get them to do things that they're not comfortable doing. Surprisingly, we require a CEO-level commitment that the company is going to do these things, set targets, report transparently, engage with shareholders, and then explain how it's implementing or not the advice they've gotten. Turns out this leads to a lot of innovation, a lot of new ideas, and alerts you to risks and trends that you ought to know about in your business. So this is an increasing trend of intelligence gathering by companies. And then disclosure. You've maybe heard that what gets measured gets managed and what gets disclosed gets done. So there's a sort of a tendency to kind of keep things under wraps and say we know the best how to run our business and do things, but actually the world demands transparency with the web. There are no secrets anyhow, so it's better to come out and say what you're doing and what your goals are, what your policies are, what your performance was against your goals, where you fell short. Companies that do that seem to actually be doing better. And there's an increasing demand for disclosure. Ceres, my organization, which is about to celebrate its 25th anniversary, was founded on demanding disclosure of companies and demanding that companies adopt principles of responsibility around their environmental impact. So one of the things we do is urge the companies to report fully and transparently on things like the risks of climate change to their business in their SEC filings, their 10-Ks, and in other ways that they communicate with shareholders and the public. And then we press the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to hold the company's feet to the fire and make sure that they do that. And if there's issues that are material to their business, that they better appear in their annual report. So anyway, I've just given some examples of operations. We work with PepsiCo. One of their facilities, a Frito-Lay plant, which may not create such sustainable food, but they've gotten better about how they use their energy. They've reduced their greenhouse gas emissions 50%. 75% of the water is recycled. And they've reduced their natural gas use by 80%. This is in a hot, dry place, so this is sort of a smart thing to do. This is a more sustainable and more efficient plant that has a competitive advantage because it does this. So you don't do these things just as a matter of philanthropy or charity. They actually make your business work better. The supply chain is really, really important. So we worked with HP, Dell, Apple, and Intel, and the New York City pension plans, which filed shareholder resolution to get them to require their suppliers to issue sustainability reports. Now, again, it doesn't sound like a big deal. You issue a sustainability report, but that requires you to actually measure and manage and figure out what you're doing in all these areas. It actually turns out to be a substantial undertaking that improves your management and your performance, and there's something called the Global Reporting Initiative, and of the 1,000 largest companies in the world, almost half of them now file GRI sustainability reports, which are actually an interesting read about sort of all aspects of the company and what it does and what its impacts are. Here's an example of unsustainable supply chain practice. I don't know if any of you read about the the tragic fires in garment factories. I think there were 2 of them in Bangladesh that killed a bunch of workers. It turns out they couldn't get out the doors. Terrible safety practices. These factories made a lot of name brand merchandise sold in the United States at places like Walmart. Walmart has actually done a fair amount to demand sustainability of their suppliers, but it clearly wasn't working in this case. Their standards weren't being implemented. Another example is Foxconn, where a lot of the Apple products that you all have, including the iPad, are made in China. Their working conditions were so terrible in terms of the wages, the hours, the living conditions, that 20 of their employees committed suicide last year. And this year they went on strike and stopped working. This is clearly unsustainable and ought to affect the reputation of Apple and their stock price, which it did to some extent, and it should do so more. I mean, they should be embarrassed. So again, Apple was a company that claimed, oh yeah, we care about sustainability and our supply chain. Well, they were clearly falling down here in their auditing of what was really working. It seems what they were really interested in is producing the products at a low price, cheaper than they could build them here. Well, that's not so good. So now Foxconn has agreed to reduce hours, improve working conditions for their employees, and thereby increase their costs. This is what you call internalizing things that used to be considered externalities, which you really need to do in order to be sustainable and to kind of level the playing field. DuPont and GE are examples of companies that have done a lot with their products and services around sustainability. GE's Ecomagination business, I believe, is up to at least $20 billion and is the most successful line of business that they have. And in some instances, it's twice as profitable as the rest of their business. Basically built around energy-efficient solutions to everything from gas turbines for power plants, jet engines, locomotives, wind turbines, sort of producing and using energy more efficiently. Huge market there. Jeff Immelt, their CEO, was 2 years behind me at Dartmouth and a fellow Phi Delt, but neither of us recognized each other's potential at the time, I guess. But we did drink together in the basement. Employees, this is really important. People want to work for sustainable companies. They want to work in green building spaces, places that are healthier, that have more natural light. They want to work for companies that are doing the right thing. They want to feel good about where they work. So if you if you manage well your environmental and social aspects of your business, you're going to be able to hire the best and the brightest. You're going to retain them. They're going to be more productive. They're going to be happier. They're going to be better ambassadors for your company. And you're going to have a huge competitive advantage so that the best companies, one of the socially responsible investment funds that's a member of our investor network, Parnassus, out in the West Coast, manages about $10 or $12 billion, has something called the Workplace Fund. And their investment strategy is to invest in the best companies, the ones that receive the highest ratings as the best places to work. And that fund has substantially outperformed its peers over the last 10 years. So they're onto something there. Sustainable companies have happier employees, and happier employees produce a more financially successful and sustainable company. Because sustainability ultimately is your ability to sustain the business, sustain your job, to be successful for a long time into the future, rather than sort of make as much money as fast as you can and then move on to the next thing. So there's a whole lot of business opportunities in what I would call sustainability, and I'm sure a lot of you are working on these in some of your engineering projects. The whole field of healthcare has a significant sustainability aspect to it. I haven't talked about that, but if you can't keep your people happy and healthy and coming to work, you're not going to have a very sustainable business. I'm here with a new hip that I got last March when I was supposed to give this talk, and the technology to develop new hips that last, I hope, were developed in substantial part here. So I'm grateful for that. But there are great opportunities in energy efficiency, renewable energy, distributed generation. The future is not giant power plants, but it's creating and converting the energy and electricity closer to where it's used. It's much more efficient. It's much more resilient. If you have some type of a natural disaster, a hurricane or a blizzard, and the power lines come down. Green buildings, huge opportunities there. Improved operational efficiency of all kinds. Life cycle analysis of your products to look at from cradle to grave, how efficient and what are the impacts of your products. Sustainable agriculture. We're going to have to produce more food with less water. There's a huge opportunity and need there. Efficient transportation. This country's transportation system needs a huge amount of infrastructure investment. Our train service is terrible compared to Europe, compared to Japan, compared to China. It's embarrassing. We need to do better. Waste reduction and recycling, and water efficiency. There's a huge amount of opportunity and need to use water more efficiently because there's just not going to be enough otherwise. And some of the benefits. Some of this is obvious, but we have the CEO of 3M saying sustainability is fundamental to our business philosophy and to the profitability of the company, or they wouldn't do it. You use less water, energy, materials, and that saves money. You reduce your supply chain costs. You improve your customer satisfaction, as well as your employee productivity and happiness. You improve your brand equity, your company's reputation. You improve community relations. If you have bad community relations, the community opposition can shut down or stop any business. It's what you call your license to operate, your social license to operate. So if you don't treat the community well, you're seeing this in China where plants are being shut down because of the pollution they cause, and the people decide they're not going to take it anymore. And they're making the government shut them down. So the day of reckoning is coming, and then the increased transparency and communication makes it easier to do that and to communicate about such things. And enhanced long-term profitability is kind of the bottom line from all of these initiatives. So wait a minute. There was one more slide here. Where did it go? Well, that was the bottom line. I was going to tell you how this all matters to you. So I'm going to have to... How did that disappear? Well, you're going to take my word for this one without a visual. So my last slide was entitled Sustainability for 21st Century Engineers. And I'll read what it said. I apologize that it disappeared somehow. Don't get lost in the technical weeds, or you'll just be an implementer and not a problem solver. Think more broadly about technical and business problems, risks, opportunities, and solutions. All engineering and business problems have technical, operational, environmental, social, and yes, political dimensions and financial dimensions, all of which need to be addressed for a successful solution. Getting it right technically might get you halfway there. And therefore, there's a need for long-term, big picture, holistic, strategic systems thinking to develop and implement sustainable solutions. So that's my advice to you today, and that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. So I would be open to any questions, comments. Hope I haven't put you all to sleep. Don't want to stand between you and the free beer for too long. But anything you'd like to challenge me on, or any questions about this subject matter, or how it might relate to what you all do or what you might aspire to do? Alex.
How do you convince a company not to ship jobs abroad when the cost is cut by a factor of two-thirds in producing even after you include shipping?
So how do you convince a company not to ship jobs abroad if it saves two-thirds of their costs even after shipping? Well, frankly, you probably don't. But you've got to convince them that when they do business overseas, they need to use U.S. standards in terms of their environmental externalities, how they treat their employees, how they interact with the community, and meet best practices. And if they do that, that levels the playing field. There's some jobs now coming back to the United States in manufacturing because In places like China and India, people are demanding higher wages, better working conditions. There's more environmental regulation. Well, guess what? Then the production costs are starting to look a little bit more like ours. And when you take into account shipping, maybe you actually ought to make it here. Our production costs have come down. Our labor productivity is high. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of that is because wages have come down to some extent, and the unions have been weakened. But whatever your views are of that. But I think we're starting to see a trend now as the rest of the world realizes the need to adopt 21st century environmental standards, and workers want to be, they'd like to live like we do. They'd like to be able to afford a home and a television and a laptop and an iPad and so forth. God help us if we don't learn to use to use energy more efficiently, and everybody lives like us, and the world would be in real trouble. Any other? Yes, sir.
When you talk about sustainability on a global level, like these multinational companies, how do you figure out which is the best way to, talking about completely different societies? For example, like a lot of things that might be sustainable for the U.S. might not be for another place. It's difficult for them to adjust to the demand that's created by the U.S., especially for things like food.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, life culture is different everywhere, and I didn't mean to say that everyone had to do things or should do things in all aspects the way they do them in the U.S. I think you have to be sensitive to the culture, the society that you're working in. You probably don't need to pay as much, but I think people everywhere, don't want to be, poisoned by chemicals at work. They want to have clean drinking water. They want to be able to breathe the air. They don't want to have to work 16 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. Their children at age 12 shouldn't be working in factories. They should be going to school. So yeah, I mean, you don't want to try to impose the U.S. culture. And there are other countries and other cultures. I mean, the Japanese had found much better ways to do things that now we've imported here. So I think you want to do what works where you are, but not by cutting corners and applying low standards that really take advantage of other places. Yes, sir.
How much of a factor is the timeline mentality of the investors that you're talking to? So, for instance, I've heard a barrier is a 6-month timeline for profitability gives a different sort of set of values about sustainability than a 10-year timeline that investors look for long-term profitability versus short-term.
Yeah, I mean, there's the sort of return on investment, return on equity calculation that companies need to have. I mean, one problem with our society and our financial system is the short-term thinking. Everybody wants to make a buck quickly, so we're sort of living in a world of quarterly capitalism, and with the 24-hour financial news cycle, I mean, a week is a long time in some ways. And stock turns over a lot. So I think there's a difference between investors who act like owners, like the Warren Buffetts, who buy companies for the long term to build them, and the traders. There's raiders, traders, and investors. The institutional investors, like in many cases college endowments like Dartmouth, pension plans, they have to invest for the long term, and at least their public equity strategies, the stocks they hold, they tend to hold them for a long time. Many of them are what you call universal investors. They'll invest in an index like the S&P 500 because they have so much money that they have to invest. So they kind of own the market, and they own it for a long time. So they're going to own IBM for the next 20 years. For better or for worse, they're probably going to own ExxonMobil for the next 20 years, though I guess Bill McKibben has argued that you should divest those type of companies. And that's sort of an interesting range of issues that I suspect some of you have some opinions on, and I'd be willing to talk about. But yeah, I mean, there's tremendous short-term pressure on companies to maximize their earnings, to kind of beat the street, to meet analyst expectations this quarter and this year. That is a negative competing factor, makes sustainability harder to do because many of these things are longer-term strategies. Some of the risks can play out any year. If you're not ready for a hurricane and you have coastal property, that's a problem. Some of these worker supply chain issues can happen tomorrow or yesterday. You can blow up your oil rigs tomorrow. I mean, you saw Shell trying to drill in the Arctic. Well, they hadn't quite taken into account the challenges of Arctic winter weather, and their drill rig ran aground. But I mean, the average CEO now lasts 3.5 years, so their incentives are to run up the numbers every year so they can maximize their compensation and retire with a huge golden parachute. That's a problem. So, I mean, one of the ways that our organization is swimming against the tide is to try to advocate longer-term thinking. The one problem for the pension plans, which were devastated by the financial collapse, is that many of them are seriously underfunded. They're 25% short or whatever. In some cases in Illinois, 50% are short of the amount of assets they need to be sustainable and continue to pay the pensions they're contractually liable for. And these short-term strategies, I mean, stock market investments have largely gone sideways. A lot of the pension plans, your average pension plan needs to make 7.5% a year on all its investments, on average, whether you're investing in stocks, bonds, private equity, commodities, real estate, in order to meet their long-term liabilities, in order to be financially sustainable. A lot of them made 1.5% last year. That's a problem. I think a lot of it is that they were kind of playing the stock market, and ironically, a lot of them have moving money into hedge funds, which is kind of the ultimate short-term strategy of betting on companies' success and failure on a day-to-day basis. Hedge funds didn't do so well last year, but everything's cyclic. So short-termism is a major enemy of sustainability. You're right. The gentleman with the hat on first.
What kind of success has the organization made, and what kind are you looking to make in the future for sustainability?
Well, I think we've been more successful with companies than investors. So we work in 3 areas: with companies, with institutional investors, and on policy. With companies, I think we've really done a lot of good. I think we've moved a lot of companies in 2 ways, through kind of the stakeholder engagement, the roadmap for sustainability, to really convince the CEOs and the CFOs that this stuff matters and needs to be core to their business strategies. We've been working with the auto companies for a long time. It's no accident that the auto companies came out in favor of the 55 mile an hour, or 55 mile per gallon, or whatever it was, 52.5 mileage standards, after fighting those things tooth and nail for 40 years. I think we were key. We've been working with Ford, with GM for years, and I think helped to convince them that this was really critical to their future. It would increase their profits, help them grow, drive technology, and they came out in favor of it. So I think we've been successful with companies. We have been less successful with investors. Business as usual. Wall Street is hard to change. They all think they're the smartest guys in the room. They're not. It's not working. In Europe and Australia, they're way ahead of the U.S. in terms of sustainable investment. We have a long way to go. We've made good headway with some of the biggest funds, CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York City, and New York State, who collectively manage $600 billion, that's not bad, who are doing a lot. I mean, one of the ways we move companies, the ones that don't move voluntarily and don't get it the first time, is we work with the investors to file shareholder resolutions at their annual meetings on, file a sustainability report, set a target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, tie your executive compensation to your ESG performance. Companies hate these, but they don't want them to come up at their annual meeting. So 50% of them settle by agreement. And they say, if you withdraw the resolution, we'll do what you asked. And that's sort of a way that with shareholder activism through investors, we've moved the companies. In terms of changing what institutional investors invest in, investing in solutions instead of problems, investing in clean energy instead of dirty energy, we have a long way to go. On policy advocacy, I guess it depends how you define success. I think we've done a good job in defending EPA's ability to stay in business and do environmental regulation in the U.S. All of the major proposals to cut back EPA regulations failed. we were in Washington with investors, with some of the more socially responsible investors, consumer brand companies, companies like Starbucks and Nike and REI, where it pays to be green and to be visibly green, with some of the investors we work with, making the business case that those regulations, like the auto emission standards, like EPA power plant regulations, actually create jobs. They drive technology, and we've done the studies and sort of have the credible economic proof that those are actually smart strategies for economic growth. So I guess we've averted losses and managed to keep EPA in the business of regulating greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants like mercury. But in terms of smart affirmative energy policy, in terms of a price on carbon in the U.S., that doesn't seem to be politically possible right now. So we've got a lot of work to do. I think I'm optimistic that we're nearing sort of an inflection point, a turning point on the investment. We're about to come out with sort of a major piece called the 21st Century Investor, sort of a bookend for that on 10 steps to sustainable investment, and take that on the road. It's supposed to come out if we all work 16 hours a day between now and May 1st, and we're hoping that'll make a real difference in some investors who've signed up for things like the UN Principles for Responsible Investment but haven't done a lot. Well, this is sort of the toolkit or the implementation manual for how to do that. So we are not yet winning in the big picture. I mean, climate change is getting worse. That's the ultimate litmus test. And I'd encourage you all to help figure out how you can contribute to the solution to that, because it's going to take a lot of smart people working on it. Yes, sir.
From what I understand, companies in Japan have business plans that go 25, 50, or possibly even 100 years into the future. Do you see any of that kind of planning here in states? Do they have those kind of long-term plans, even generations forward?
I have not seen it generations forward. I think, 3-year, 5-year, our economy has a lot of short-term pressures. I mean, our government also can't seem to, make a plan of any length, let alone execute it. And one of the benefits of the Chinese system of government, which has a lot of other problems, is they can make a plan and they can generally execute it. We can't make a plan. So we have sort of chaos, and I think are shooting ourselves in the foot competitively. So, longer-term planning, I think, would be desirable. I think the smart companies are doing it, and it depends on what industry. And if you're in the oil industry, the electric power industry, your investment time horizon, I mean, your plants, your capital investments have to last for 30 years. So, I mean, ExxonMobil actually does good long-term business planning based on the world that we now live in. But I think we would benefit from longer-term business plans. Part of the problem is uncertain government policies. You need a certain amount of investment certainty, and we can't seem to set predictable policies. Look at our renewable energy policies. The production tax credit for wind is going to expire. There were no new wind projects started last year because it was going to expire. Well, at the last minute on January 1st, suddenly it gets extended for 1 year. But 1 year is probably not enough to drive a lot of investment, because then it's going to expire and there's going to be uncertainty as to whether that's in place again. So I think our sort of inconsistent, unpredictable government policies are a problem. I mean, my sense is the Japanese have done a little bit better in terms of longer-term government policies as well. But again, short-termism is a major enemy of what we're trying to accomplish. Others, gentleman in the plaid shirt first.
Wondering if you would actually comment on the divestment movement and the larger, what you see as the game plan for getting the U.S. to take meaningful action on climate change.
I'm a big admirer of Bill McKibben. Some of his books, the one he wrote in 1989 on climate change, one called Deep Economy, I think are some of the most influential books I've read. So I think Bill and his followers are performing a great service in calling attention to the urgency of climate change, which is the greatest problem that the world faces. It makes terrorism look like child's play. I mean, we're just seeing this is 1 degree warming, and look what we're getting. We're on a trajectory to 4 degrees Celsius of warming. I cannot imagine the chaos, but the World Bank just did a report that describes it. However, divestiture, I'm not sure, is certainly not a solution that works for all institutional investors for the following reasons. So I don't want to be quoted as saying that it's a bad idea. I view Bill McKibben and 350.org as sort of a collaborator of ours who are taking one approach to it. But if you divest, somebody else is going to buy the stock. It doesn't exactly bring down the oil companies. Trying to demonize them and make them the enemy makes it very hard to work with them and persuade them that maybe they should diversify their business plan or something. If you stay a shareholder, there's something called corporate engagement. That's everything from the stakeholder engagement or filing shareholder resolutions, sitting down with the company and arguing or trying to persuade them that they should take a different approach, that maybe they should be investing in renewables and more in biofuels. I mean, you're not going to convince ExxonMobil that they're in the wrong business, in the petroleum business. It's been pretty profitable, and people are going to keep using gasoline and oil, and they're using a lot more in the East as we use less. So I think for many institutional investors, divestiture, like if you're a big pension plan, it doesn't. How do you divest from the fossil fuel industry? It's so pervasive. I mean, it's all the oil and gas companies, it's the coal companies, it's the power companies. Is it the car companies? Is it the Halliburtons and the people who support the production of oil and the supply chain and the pipeline companies? It's such a huge part of investment portfolios now. And if you're an institutional investor, if you're the Dartmouth Endowment or your CalPERS or the Massachusetts Pension Plan, your fiduciary duty is to maximize your risk-adjusted returns over the life of the fund. You're in business not to save the planet, at least that's not your first goal. You're in business to make adequate returns on your investments so that you can fund scholarships, pay faculty salaries, keep the physical plant running, pay pensions, pay retirees' health care costs. So, if divesting would put a pension plan or a college endowment in a worse economic position, it's hard to justify in terms of fiduciary duty. So I think the alternatives include maintaining your holdings, but being aggressive as an active shareholder with the company and saying, you need to do better. What is your plan, ExxonMobil, for climate change? What scenarios have you modeled during your capital investment time horizon, 20, 30 years out? What do you think the effects, how much is it going to get warmer? What's that going to do to your facilities in the Gulf of Mexico, your offshore rigs? What's going to happen to the demand for your product? What do you expect government to do when climate becomes a real crisis and we get regulation and a price on carbon? It's going to happen. It's happening in the rest of the world. It's happening in California, which is the world's 9th largest economy. What's your plan for that? How are you going to adapt? What's it going to cost? Tell your shareholders. I'd like to know that because I think that would force them to do some planning they haven't done. Another aspect is I think some capital needs to be reallocated, maybe a lot of it. So I think one thing Bill McKibben needs to get on is, well, what should you invest in? Because you're not just going to pull the money out of the market and put it under the mattress. You need to do something with it. What kind of solutions should you be investing in? I think there is a huge need. I think the World Economic Forum, the people who do the Davos conference, the International Energy Agency, Bloomberg, others, estimates you'll need somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion, probably close to $1 trillion of investment in clean energy every year in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. Right now, we're getting somewhere around 260 to 300 billion of investment. So there's a huge deficit. However, right now, there aren't the investment products and strategies. If I'm a big pension fund and say, okay, I want to put $50 billion, $20 billion, $100 billion, whatever, $2 billion into clean energy. Pretty much you can't do it. The market doesn't have the capacity right now. It needs to build it. Now, part of the problem is the lack of government policies, lack of a price on carbon that would drive the creation of that type of investment vehicle. So I think we need to create both supply and demand for clean energy investments. There's a huge need for green, resilient infrastructure. More efficient water treatment, more efficient water movement, transportation, public transportation systems, renewable energy, hundreds of billions of dollars, which would actually be great investments for pension funds because infrastructure investments tend to produce high single-digit long-term returns, just what a pension fund needs. So pension funds are actually looking to move more money into alternative investments like that, but right now they can't figure out how, and there aren't really such good places to put the money now. So that's one of the financial engineering we're trying to help with is to try to create both the demand from the institutional investors and then get those who create investment projects, products and strategies like green bonds to come up with a solution. So I think over time, I think capital, in order to avoid catastrophic climate change, capital needs to be reallocated in a smart way from investing in the problems to investing in the solutions, from dirty, high-carbon energy to cleaner, low-carbon energy, to energy efficiency. But just by divesting right now, that doesn't get you there. You make a statement, and I think a statement needs to be made. This is a serious problem. We're not doing much at all about it. I mean, that's why I quit a very good job as a partner in a big law firm to take an 80% pay cut so I could work 60 hours a week on this problem. But it's more complicated than that. But divestiture is a great attention getter. So that's my boss, Mindy Luber, our CEO, wrote a blog about this that you might want to look at. When you open the Ceres website, ceres.org, it appears in the first page. And it sort of kind of explains why, sort of in a more articulate way than what I just said, why this is not a soundbite answer to divest or not. I'd love to see the Dartmouth Endowment join our investor network with some of the other big endowments and get to work on rolling up their sleeves and dealing with this problem on about 3 dimensions. Do a carbon risk assessment of your portfolio. Here's an interesting and disturbing fact. The International Energy Agency, which is not exactly a left-wing organization, it tends to basically represent the world oil and gas industry and is the source of data that they rely on, just issued a study in their 2010 energy assessment that 2/3 of the reserves of fossil fuel in the world, the reserves held by the oil, gas, and coal companies, cannot be burned without causing catastrophic climate change. This is a real problem, including for those companies, because a huge amount of their valuation, at least 2/3 of their valuation on average, comes from the reserves in the ground, their proven reserves. Well, the world cannot let them burn those reserves or the planet is completely screwed. We'll have catastrophic climate change. That's what we call a carbon bubble. So there is real risk, but it's probably not this year. Investing in Chevron and Shell and ExxonMobil is probably a pretty good investment for a college or a pension fund this year. But long term, this can't continue. So, and that's a good question to put to ExxonMobil and Chevron. How do you deal with this? Under what scenario could you burn all of these reserves? And you think the regulators are going to let you? At some point they can't. I mean, at some point things just get too ugly. I just hope it's not too late. So these are the problems that keep me up at night. Yes, sir.
I just wondered if you've ever heard of any technologies like carbon sequestration that would work.
Carbon capture and storage, I guess, theoretically works. It hasn't been demonstrated on a full-scale power plant now. It's being tried. I mean, there's a bunch of problems with it. It causes a huge parasitic load on the power plant. It uses up 15, 20, 25% of the power, at least with existing technologies, from the power plant in order to separate the CO2 out of the off gas and pump it to a place where you can pump it down in the ground and hope to God it stays there forever. However, with all this fracking, where you're fracturing shale and taking out the natural gas, that may be creating good reservoirs where you could put the stuff back down in. But it's hugely expensive and it's not economical, and no power company will do it. Probably costs, in the order of $1 billion a plant. For a 1,000 megawatt or 1 gigawatt power plant, probably costs something like the initial capital cost of the plant to add this technology. Now, I think with some of the IGCC, some of the latest technologies, it becomes easier. I think we're going to need to do it. Hopefully, maybe China will lead us there. but at this point, it's not economic to do. Burning natural gas is a hell of a lot better in terms of greenhouse gas emissions than burning coal, if you don't lose a bunch of it in fugitive emissions from the fracking to the power plant. I think if you lose 4% of it, then it's as bad as coal, because methane is 21 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. So one of the things we're working on is with investors is pushing the oil and gas companies to manage to avoid the fugitive emissions, to avoid the venting, to not lose the product, which when gas is $2 a million cubic feet or $3 or whatever the price is now, it's not such a big deal if you lose some of your product. I saw an estimate yesterday which was disturbing, that 8% of the natural gas produced globally, particularly in places like Russia and things, is lost to the atmosphere. That's devastating. That's worse than coal. So natural gas is good, and you should repower your power plant if you can avoid losing the gas. Alex, how many, do I need to stop?
On this optimistic note, I will draw this to a conclusion. And if you have more questions, please, you are invited